Well, hello. I would like to talk to you today about some signs that I have been getting recently over the last couple of months. Um, I started getting signs from God in the form of coincidences. And the coincidences that I've been getting are truly, truly amazing. Sometimes they're just supernaturally remarkable. I started getting them in about 2003 when I first became a Christian, and more, increasingly and of importance, things have been happening ever since I was baptized with the Holy Spirit. It seems they've been getting more and more important and intense. So let me just start off with telling you what recently has happened and why I'm making this video. Basically, on November 23rd, I received a coincidence of Dallas, and when it first happened, I was kind of like, "Wow, that is the attention getter." It's kind of like flag up when I have a coincidence happen. It's basically usually with something happening twice and consecutively. That usually is a pretty rare occurrence. And so when that happened, I was kind of like, "Wow, okay, Lord, you got my attention there, Dallas. I'll go ahead and I'll keep that in mind." And what happened was, 3 days later, as I was, praying about it and thinking about it, that God would give me something else. On November 26th, I had another coincidence of Dallas again. And so now, having two coincidences, both happening twice and consecutively, very rare things happening, I am just going, okay, there's definitely something going on in Dallas. Lord, what do you have? I mean, what is going on? I mean, Dallas, what's going on? And it's November 26th. December's around the corner. Football season's happening. I happen to know that the Super Bowl is going to be in Dallas, and I'm just thinking, wow, that's a possibility, but I really don't know what's going on. So I prayed to the Lord, and I definitely say, in my prayer, I'm like, "Lord, okay, you've got my attention. I've got it. I understand, Dallas. You've given it to me twice now. It's a confirmation. I know what you're telling me is Dallas." But what I really didn't know for sure was that I'm assuming that it's Dallas, Texas. That would be the most common, most widely thought of Dallas. If you were to tell anybody else Dallas, I'm sure that's what they would think of. But I have some friends have a friend that lives in Dallas, Georgia, and I also have knowledge of there being a USS Dallas, which is I think a nuclear submarine that the United States Navy has, named the USS Dallas. And then I happen to know people who are named Dallas. And so, I did pray to God to have Him explain to me and to be clarifying to me which Dallas indeed that it was. And for anything else to happen, and to let me know what is going to happen in Dallas. And the reason I did that and went into that detail is because earlier in my walk with God, probably 4 years ago or so, we're talking 2006, 2007, around there. Oh no, it had been 2005. I had coincidences happen with New Orleans. And when that happened, I had been talking about coincidences, as I often do. I share these things with people. I share them with coworkers. I'm pretty bold at sharing them and discussing them and doing things like that. And when I do those things, sometimes God will have a coincidence to almost like put a coincidence on top of a coincidence to kind of signify, hey, that what you guys were just talking about, hello, here's another coincidence. Like, he confirms it. So when I give God the credit and God the glory, and I say that the coincidences are from God, and I'm pretty bold and faithful in that way, and I do share that. So when I was talking to somebody about coincidences and things happening like that, a coincidence happened right then and there involving the town of New Orleans. And I just thought at the time that it was God going, see, these coincidences really do happen, aren't they neat? Pay attention. They're kind of like flags, like, hello. And so that's what I assumed that coincidence to be was. And later on I found out that I assumed wrong, and that typically it's been happening. It doesn't negate the fact that the sign happened and what the sign meant. It just pretty much shows that I was new to getting signs at that time, and I'm still learning from them, obviously. So here comes this sign, New Orleans, and that was a few months later. I get a sign of a levy for a levy. And the way it came in was very, very, very rare. I mean, a very rare coincidence of happening twice and consecutively. Just very rare. And so when I got that, I was like, oh, wow, a levy for a levy. I was like, oh, my gosh, that's about flooding. What should I pray for? Well, the year prior to that, I had gone and was led to go to a town in southern Minnesota, and that town had just flooded. And so that was the only area that I knew about flooding that the Lord was personally telling me about, and I was personally attached to. And so I prayed for that town to be protected from flooding. And that town didn't have any flooding that summer, and I thought that's all that it meant. And after that, the Katrina hit, the Hurricane Katrina hit, and New Orleans flooded, and the levees failed, and that's what happened. And then after that happened, I was like, oh, I missed it. I completely missed it. Number one, I never knew that New Orleans had levees. I knew that they were low. I knew that they could flood, but I didn't know exactly how. I'm not from the South. I didn't know anything about that. And then when it happened, I was like, oh, the New Orleans, the levee. It all made sense, but I didn't figure it out until later. And I was fairly new at getting signs and coincidences at that time. I was still learning about them and learning how to receive them and what to look for and what to watch for. And so when the Dallas signs started coming now, I am basically going, okay, I've now completely, tuned into Dallas, and I'm like, okay, Lord, I know that you're telling me Dallas, and I'm not going to miss it, and I'm not going to blow it like I did last time with New Orleans. I'm going to tune in, I'm going to pay attention to what you're telling me. And so when he gave me the 2 Dallas signs, I'm like, whoa, this is heads up. Something's going on with Dallas. And the next sign or coincidence that I get was a coincidence of the word Minuteman. And the coincidence that I got with Minuteman right away led me to believing and to thinking about a missile. Now, I used to be a nuclear weapons specialist in the United States Air Force, and I know about nuclear weapons, and I knew that a Minuteman was a system that the United States used ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, and they carry the major heavy duty nuclear warheads. I know of that, and it's something that I know about, and I think, you know, there are other terminologies of Minuteman. The Revolutionary War had Minutemen in them, and there's a symbol on the New England Patriots football team that depicts the Revolutionary War Minutemen. So that's a possibility. There's a Minuteman cleaning company. There's a Minuteman printing company. You know, all these things start flowing into my mind, and I started thinking, well, along the lines of New Orleans and getting a levy for a levy, it points to some kind of a disastrous kind of a thing for New Orleans, which is what it ended up being. So along that line is how I'm assuming, and you know, you got to kind of assume, and you kind of got to watch out for that, but that's what made me gear up to think about Minuteman being a missile and a possible missile attack coming on Dallas. So now that's getting really serious, and the Lord's really got my attention, because this is serious. This isn't a missile that gets launched out of a plane and takes out a chunk of a building. This is a missile that is huge in its stature, and it takes out cities, and it's devastating. And if it were loaded with a nuclear payload, it would be just extremely devastating. And so I asked the Lord, I'm like, oh gosh, Lord, you know, you really have my attention now. What are you doing? And I started thinking, well, Dallas is a big city, and it's the Super Bowl's coming. I'm still thinking about that, and so, you know, but I'm still praying. Is the Dallas, Texas, the big one in Dallas, Texas? Is that the Dallas that you're talking about? And as I continue to pray that, I had another coincidence which happened, and it led me to this church where I was going to go and hear an NFL player speak. And it was a pretty good coincidence that I knew I needed to go there. And so I go to that church, and the night before, that Saturday night before the Sunday, obviously, Minnesota had a big snowstorm, and it caused a lot of flights to not even be able to come into Minnesota. And the Metrodome collapsed because of the weight of the snow for only the second time in its history. And this person, this Joe Jackson, was an ex-player of the Minnesota Vikings. He was going to speak at this church, but he couldn't fly in because of the snowstorm, so he was stranded in, well, not stranded, but he was stuck in Arizona and wasn't able to fly in. And when I showed up at the church, being led to go to this church, I talked to the pastor there about getting the signs for Dallas and that Minuteman. And he said, you know, maybe I might have you speak. And I thought about that, and I went, wow, I had not planned on that at all. I had only planned on having to hear Joe Jackson speak. I didn't plan on doing any speaking myself. But the pastor got up, and he started talking to the congregation about getting signs and getting words from God. And he even talked about the